record, like this is on record.
All right.
But I feel like Code Red was such a game changer for me because I didn't really understand about my periods. I knew I had period pains. I knew I'd be on the pill to control my period, like, and would continue taking the pill, but when I was supposed to have a break because it's inconvenient to have a period at that time, in case I was going out or I was going on holiday and all of these things. And then when I was reading Code Red, I was like, oh my God, I want this power. And I remember I was still hairdressing there, like still working at the salon hairdressing. And I had the book in the staff room and the girls were like, what are you reading now? Like first it's crystals, now it's periods. And I was like, yeah, honestly, like, and a few of the girls read it after and they were like, whoa, like, why aren't we taught this? Like, this is unreal. And so many people, and like women especially, don't understand about their bodies and their cycles, and also like the connection with the moon as well, because I think now more people are wanting to get in tune with the moon and it feels very external.
Yeah.
Whereas if you want to start tuning into your intuition and the moon, like it's got to be an inside job. That you've got to understand like all of that process and how it flows. But I'm gonna interrupt myself and just say like, can you like introduce, for anyone who doesn't know you, because I'm like fangirling here and I think I could just wax lyrical and just be like, oh my God, you've changed my life and you're incredible. But like, if anyone who doesn't know you, would you mind like just introducing yourself, like who you are, what you do, and how you got into your like line of work?
Yeah, so I'm Lisa Lister. Thanks for having me, Tamara. It's awesome that we're doing this, and like I'm so excited about like the connectivity between your work and what we're doing together. So I'm very happy about that. I have written Code Red, which is a book specifically about knowing your flow, unlocking the superpowers that are held within our menstrual cycle, so that we can create this really bloody brilliant life, right? Which is sounds ridiculous, especially if you hate, if you've been taught, which like so many of us have, if you've been taught that like your period is an inconvenience or actually it's just really painful. So you're like, if you hear someone like me going, oh, it's like, it's amazing, like actually if you know what you're, if you know
so
about
powerful.
I know, like it's a powerful thing. You're like,
can't even get out of bed, like I'm bleeding everywhere, I'm not feeling it.
And that's how it was for me, Tamara. Like, that's how it was for me, right? This is why I feel like I had to write this book the first time round, was because there was a time in my 20s when I was bleeding more days than I wasn't. Like when my whole, I had this like job in London, I was working for magazines, I was working in TV, like I was all swishy, I was like, look at me. But I was totally disconnected from like the head down, like didn't have a clue what was going on in my body. And it was a wake-up call, it was an absolute wake-up call. Everything had to change because of it, but I didn't know what was going on down there. I had no clue, and I was like mid-20s. I'd had that one class in school like that we all get, like when you get told about box of tampons, box of tampons or a sanitary towel, and then like the boys have to go in another room, which like makes no sense whatsoever, but like that's what happened. And I'm not so sure, even being someone who has gone into schools and taught lots about on PCSE, sorry, like the health education. I've got it wrong. I know I've got it wrong. Like basically like the sexual education I used to teach that. It hasn't changed much because like no one wants us to know this magic. No one wants us to learn about this, when actually this is the biggest thing I'm told when I share this, when I share the book, when I share the workshops, when I work with women. So you asked what I do, like I mainly work with like the main part of my work is to use our cyclic nature, our rhythmic intelligence, to support our lives, to really understand like what's happening down there, like why it's disrupted, why for instance like you're bleeding more days than you're not, and then how we can structure our lives in accordance with like what's going on in the world, like with so we can understand that, okay, so this is happening and this is happening in my body, what do I need? We've been taught, like this been messy as, like we've been taught to be compliant. We've been taught to be, like we've literally been unplugged from that power source, which is our body, which is our menstrual cycle, unplugged from that. Had that taken, you know, and literally so that we would be productive, so that
Yeah.
we wouldn't question things. But actually, when we recognize, wait up, like, so we're not just that bit where we bleed, that, you know, that gnarly bit, which is just really an inconvenience. We're not just that. Oh, and that gnarly bit that's just an inconvenience and really painful doesn't have to be painful. Oh, okay. Well, and then we can talk about it, and it's not a taboo, and it's actually something that can empower us and like be really joyful. Like, I'll whisper that, like, because people don't like, people are like not ready for the joyful straight away, that's for sure. But it can be, because when we know each phase, we start to know ourselves better, and when we know ourselves better, we can start to really we start to remember, wait up, this is who I am, this is who I am, this is my medicine, and this is what I can give to the world on my terms. So like, I know, right? So it's just like, we were just talking previously about, like, just when we say yes to things and when we say no to things, like, that becomes way easier when we know about the phases of the menstrual cycle, which, as you know, like, are in concordance with the phases of the moon. So we can see these reflections in us and in nature, in the cosmos too.
And how would you describe, like, the connection between the moon and the menstrual cycle?
Well, indigenous cultures have known forever, right, that, you know, in indigenous cultures, like, the moon and the menstrual, like, the moon and the word moon and the word menstruation are interchangeable, right? Like, so they've always known that there's been a connectivity between the moon and the menstrual cycle. And so personally, and so it gets a bit weird, because a lot of people think that we have to bleed in tune with the moon, which we absolutely would have done back in the day, right? We absolutely would have done. But now, because of blue light, because of, like, computer screens, because of contraception in the water, for a trillion reasons, it means that we don't. So one of my big things, and this is why I'm so glad we're having this conversation, is because when people work with the moon and then they recognize this mirror that happens in our bodies, like women and those who bleed recognize this mirror, they're like, oh, actually, so it's roughly the same amount of days. The moon cycle is roughly the same amount of days as the menstrual cycle. Amazing. All right. Oh, and it has similar amount of, so it has the same phases, and they do the same things, and it's like, so it's a total reflection. We're made up of 70-ish% water. I don't know statistics, but, like, we're made up of a lot of water. And the moon controls controls the actual tides of Mother Nature, so it makes total sense that it controls our tides, our emotions as well. And so if we recognize that, all right, so the moon has her phases, we have our phases too, and they're reflective of each other. Now, that doesn't mean they have to be in tune with it. It doesn't mean they have to be in sync with each other.
Because that's something, I think, because the moon, I'm going to, if you wouldn't mind, like, I feel like you're the
tell us.
But, like, how, from what I've learned from you, is that with the moon phases and the moon cycles, they reflect each other in a way as, like, the new moon would be like when you're like menstrual, premenstrual.
New moon, dark moon, new moon is just coming from premenstrual into menstruation. Absolutely.
Into menstruation, and then we go into waxing, which is pre-ovulation. Full moon, ovulation. Waning goes into premenstrual again. Premenstrual, and then I'm like trying to and it goes around. That's how they reflect. And energetically, if you start to understand I think sometimes in external concepts it's easier to understand. So when you think, okay, this is the moon's energy, this is what's going on, okay, well, that's what's going on inside of me energetically. And I think understanding that we're cyclical, like, we're not supposed to be, like, on or feeling inspired or creative or outgoing all of the time. Like, there are certain parts of the cycle, like, even, like, I love talking about periods and our cycles. Like, it comes up in conversation all the time with my friends. Like, even I was on the phone to my friend, like, a little while ago, and she'd just gone into a cafe, and she's like, oh my God, all the guys are so hot in here. And I was like, are you ovulating? And she was like, oh my God, I am.
Yes, you are.
And it really changes. Or, like, if you're in a relationship, like, I know from me and a few of my friends, like, when you're premenstrual, like, the volume to your partner's eating is cranked up and it's so unbearable.
One of the women in Code Red, like I interviewed a few of the incredible women that I've worked with over the years. She says exactly that. So she says listening to her partner drink water is like hearing him eat carrots. It's like, it's just like, and I was like, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
You know, and it's because of, in the first half of our cycle, like we're seeking, you know, we're meant to, you know, we're seeking out that kind of partner to be with, to possibly, you know, make babies with, right? So when we ovulate, so when it comes into that sex, so in that first half of the cycle, if you're with a partner, they get away with murder. Like some of the stuff that you would be like, that would really piss you off, doesn't piss you off in that first half, because you're looking for a mate, you're looking for a potential partner. You know, you're like, oh, like you say, so your friend was like, everyone is hot, right? Like, because potentially one of you is going to make out with me. Like that's kind of how we feel. Whereas like that second half of the cycle, when the attention's not out there, it's inwards, and it's like inwards, and it's about like nesting, and it's about tending to ourselves, self-care, like really understand, asking some really big questions. Like that shit don't fly.
Yeah.
Like honestly, like, you know, if
there's no filter.
Like my husband could leave a towel out that first half of my cycle, and I'm like, oh, sorry, I'll pick it up. That's a bit annoying. I'll pick it up. Second half of the cycle, forget about it. Like that, he is the worst person in the world. We might get a divorce. Like seriously, what's happened? Like, and so, and it's understanding that that's true of the moon phases, and it's true of our menstrual cycle too, right? Like so, and so, like you say, it becomes a personal journey if you menstruate, but ultimately having the moon cycles reflect that, really helps us to have a bigger understanding of the impact on the collective as well, like to have a bigger understanding of how it's going, like why the world might be doing what it's doing at a specific time, and then we have our own kind of, especially if they don't match.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I think of some of my friends, the conversation is like, when they bleed on the full moon, like it's just too much. Everything is so intense. And I think getting to know, like, I think one of the things that was so empowering from reading Code Red for me was about cycle, like tracking your cycle. I didn't do it straight away. I was like, that's a cool idea. Didn't do it straight away, but started to observe what was going on, and then I started tracking. And if I hadn't have started tracking, I wouldn't have realized how irregular my periods actually were. Right. And if I hadn't tracked it and had it on an app, I wouldn't have had that proof to back it up and get the doctor to pay attention when I went to the doctor.
Yes.
Like all of these things.
This is the deal. Like this, and for me, like everyone asks, like, what's the most important part about menstrual cycle awareness? Like, why do you share it? Like, what's it about? And I'm like, track your cycles, because when you track them, like, and it's because we've been taught that tracking our cycles is for like people that want to get pregnant generally, and so, and it's a bit boring. Like, so, but actually, I mean, I'm a bit geeky, so like I do it all by hand. Like I'm obsessed with like I want to have like, oh, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling that, but like it doesn't have to be that. It can just be a one word feel for that day, for instance. But like what you just said is the gold, is that we actually get to know ourselves better. Like if we understand our cyclic nature, it can be as practical as the like, oh, okay, like so this cycle is 38 days, like is that normal? Well, if
that's definitely not normal.
Well, this is the thing, if you like, and I would
what's normal now though, that's the thing as well.
So I would suggest like maybe holding back on the Google for at least 3 months, so that you've got like a pattern, because actually if 38 days is your pattern, then that's your cycle. That's normal. That's your normal, right? Like, so it doesn't have to be like, oh, okay, this is like it has to be 28 days or anything. And this was one of the things when I was writing Code Red, I really didn't want to create like another structure or another like 5-point plan that people feel they have to like kind of abide by, or like, or if they didn't do it right, like there is no,
it sets up that failure like in bunny ears of like, oh, like
but that's why we track. Because then we realize, like, so I give like broad brush strokes of the phases, the the insight into each phase and like what power there could be in it. Also, like what hotspots are in it as well, like what places like where potentially, like, you know, just be aware that potentially this could happen as well in each phase. And then like you get to kind of feel that for yourself. Like you said, then you might notice that your ovulation, for instance, like people like in, you know, for a broad brushstroke of ovulation would be that like you're hot to trot, like you feel really sexy, like you feel really good about yourself. Like you'll find that most people who take selfies of themselves on Instagram will be doing it when they're
I'm on
ovulating.
Instagram stories. That is when I'm like, hey babe.
The only time you'll find me on Instagram, like, honestly. But that's the truth, right? Is that we get to know those things about ourselves. But more importantly than all of that is, if they are irregular, if there is something up, like if you are experiencing pain or discomfort, you can then start to recognize, when am I experiencing them? Like, all right, so day 24, like I get this, or day 22, this happens. Well, if something's happening around day 22 to day 24, potentially if you're having like a 28-ish day cycle, that's when like different hormones are peaking, like they've gone down and they start to come back up again, and that can then create like intolerances. It can create like dominance of a certain hormone over another, and then that creates physical manifestations in our body. Then we've got intel, right? Because what I'm finding over and over again in my job and my work is that that like women's health is like way down there on the list in terms of funding, in terms of research. Can't think why.
But like what is it, Viagra? You can get, like, there's adverts for that on TV. There's plenty of research on that.
Exactly, right. You know, and we've said this a million times, right? Like if people, you know, if anyone else were to menstruate, it would all be kind of researched and funded, and we would have entire weeks off, I'm sure. But that's not the case, right? So because it's not funded and because it's not researched, as well as other illnesses and other health areas, it means we have to do a lot of our own work. But also we have to take, and something I've also found is that it's about self-agency. You know, when I was bleeding more than I wasn't, then I was going to the doctor, and they were like, you know, everything was a process of elimination. And they did a million tests, and ultimately after like months and months and months of misdiagnosis, they came up with the fact you've got endometriosis, you've got PCOS. Like, okay. Then yes, it's okay for a minute, like for a teeny tiny minute,
just because you've got a label, like something
exactly, right?
Something to hold on to.
Yeah, exactly. So you're like, oh, finally I know what this is now. But then in the next breath, you know, and I talk about this in like Love Your Lady Landscape and in Code Red, is that like that doctor, a dude in a white coat, decides that based on the fact that you've got these two diagnoses,
it's just tick boxes, isn't that?
Exactly, right? Like, you're not going to be able to have babies, we'll whip it out. I'm like, whip what out? And like, and this was the deal, like I was in my mid-20s and I didn't even know what he was talking about whipping out. So that's, you know, and that's when we asked, and
was that his actual words?
Yes.
Fuck.
Like, I know, and this is what led me to do the work. Like, I mean, I didn't go to my career coach at school and go, oh, do you know what, I'd love to talk about periods, I'd love to talk about vaginas and vulvas all my life, I'd love it. But it's what's led me to here, and I'm so grateful, and I feel like it's my responsibility as someone who figured out, do you know what, like, we have, and that's what it goes back to the tracking, is like, who's figured out, if we understand ourselves, we get to have some agency. Because there'd be a lot of people that would just be like, that's really painful, that's the better option. And there's no judgment if you choose to do that, by the way. Like, I'm really down with everyone having free choice, but I don't want it to be the only choice. I want everyone to be able to make like informed decisions based on like having some information about what else you could try if you wanted to. And so that's what like a big part of the work is for me, is that I want to share this, I want to share what's possible, because I know from like just being in connectivity with so many women that actually just tracking, realizing like that day 25 I'm not mad, like day 25 I just want, like, I'm just rageful actually, like, because I'm in my premenstrual phase, there's rage and I've not got anywhere to put it. And so if I'm having to work, if I'm having to make dinners, if I'm having to show up for my family, for my colleagues at work, for like it's tiring because I've not tended to myself. Now if I know that day 25 that comes up every day 25, then I'm not so mad. You know, that's because that's what I was told. Like I was told, you know, you're absolutely mad. You need to take antidepressants. And it's like, but when you track, you realize, well, I'm only mad for like 2 or 3 days a month. Well, if I can then recognize what those 2 to 3 days a month are and where they are in my cycle, I can then start to make some decisions and choices about how I live my life, and about maybe what supplements I want to take, or recognize what my hormones are doing, or realize if I can, like, not to do so many clients that day, or just to take my workload down from, like, you know, like from doing all the things down to like, I'm going to get 3 things done today, and that's going to be plenty, and I'm going to be all right about it and not beat myself up about it.
It's just that when you have that self-awareness, it just is so liberating. And it's so simple. It's so simple of just like, these are the days where I don't feel great. I'm going to be kind to myself. I'm going to be generous to myself. And I know that I need to be a little bit extra compassionate to the people around me, because like you said, if that was in another day earlier on in my cycle, that wouldn't be an issue. So having that, it helps you detach from the reaction of like, of the
that
rage.
Helps give them the heads up as well, right? Like, so if people know, like, you know, especially if you live in a house with housemates, or in a house, you know, with a partner, like me being able to tell my husband, look, day 25 is like hard for me, like, so if I react, and it is a reaction, you know, it's like, it's almost like an inability to take a beat and respond, right? Like, so I know that about myself. If you know that, then you can just give them a heads up and be like, do you know what, this is not about you. Like, this is absolutely not about you. Like, you will know if it's about you, but it's not right now. Like,
and I might try and make it as if it is about you, but it isn't. Exactly. And the guy's like, okay.
But honestly, anything that gives, and you know, and that's why I share in Code Red as well, that there is a dude guide. Like, my husband has wrote a thing, and it's very like heteronormative. I get it, but it's also super helpful for any of the men in your life. Like, if you live with you know, if you've got daughters, if you've got, you know, cousins, if you live with, you know, whoever it is, it's really just helpful, like, to know like what is going on for people. And so my husband wrote just like a really simple, from a dude perspective, guide.
Oh, brilliant. I don't think I've seen
that just breaks and it's just like breaks it down, like, just really simple, and like, it's almost like you can just leave it open, and like, dads can read it, like husbands can read it, like partners can read it, housemates, people in your life that you just want them to know, like, that's what's happening in my cycle. Like, you don't have to read the whole book, like, you don't have to listen to anything, like, but just so you know that's happening. And then we all just, I mean, honestly, like, we find it liberating, like you say, but so does other people around us, if they understand like what's going on.
Definitely. And I think that's the other thing, is when we know what's going on, then it's easier to communicate it.
Exactly.
Because I think that's where the frustration comes from. And like, rage is good, like, if it's channeled in the right way, like, rage is super powerful, but when it's channeled in the right way, rather than reacting to something, then you've got a layer of guilt on that, which isn't fun for anyone.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing as well, like, that's that whole part of that cycle really will bring up, like, premenstrual phase of your menstrual cycle will bring up stuff. Like, that's its job, like, that's what it is for. And so it's calling you in to tend to it, like, to get really clear on the facts, like, are you sure, like, because ultimately you might be pregnant, right? So that's what the whole deal is about, right? So potentially you might be pregnant, so that premenstrual phase is to make sure everything's cleared out, to make sure like, whether it's people, whether it's ideas, whether it's like, but you get, which is great, because but then you can, you know, whether you're pregnant or not, you get to then use that phase for your own life, which means that those things that happen in that phase, which is the clear out, like I say, it's not a great time for an argument, but it is a really good time to recognize, like, this is not okay. For instance, like, there might be something you're putting up with in a relationship that just keeps coming up and coming up and coming up, and like I say, in that first half of the cycle, you put up with it, and that when it gets to that premenstrual phase, you're like, there it is again. And so actually what I suggest is, like, don't have the conversation then, really don't have the conversation, then that would be like, that ain't gonna go down well. But hold it, bleed on it. Like, when you bleed, like, let any of the kind of anger and feeling around whatever that subject is, like, be released, so that you can then start to have the conversation when you're more articulate, when there's a bit more room to breathe, when there's a bit more capacity to like be in conversation, rather than to be like reactionary and reactive, because potentially like that could save a relationship. Or it might mean that you're just much more clearer, because once you've bled, you're like, no, that is a non-negotiable, that is not happening again, I'm not having that. So that when you come back into that second part, the first part of the cycle again, you're like, no. But you do it from a much more kind of, you've given yourself space, you've created like space for discernment, you've created space for there to be like, oh, okay, this is exactly how I feel now, as opposed to, like you said, that reaction, like, rah.
Yeah. I see my journal, like journaling pages, like when I'm like, yeah, I think I just need to be on my own, I think I need to leave him, I might move here, like that. And he'd say, oh yeah, here we had a really nice day together, he's really sweet. If he ever read it, he'd be like, oh my god, who am I living with? Like,
but potentially, like, people are living with, like, you know, if you're someone who's living with a woman, like, potentially you're living with 4 different women, like, they're showing up in different, and that's the deal. Like, we think we've been told that inconsistency makes us unproductive, makes us flaky, makes us all of these things, but when we understand that we are consistently inconsistent, right? So we have this cyclic rhythm. So potentially each month we show up in different ways, in different phases, and like psychologically, mentally, physically, spiritually, whatever, then it makes everything much more understandable for everyone. It's like, oh, of course.
And like for people, what would, for people that are on the, I mean, like the pill, that's just like a huge other conversation in itself. But like for people that are on the pill, or who are like going through menopause, like how could they track their cycles and work with that energy that comes through?
Well, there's no judgment to anyone that chooses to go on the pill. Like, it was made for a reason, right? And it's helpful. Like, and so that's definitely, but I think like that's where your book comes into its own, right? That's where your work comes into its own, in terms of like, you know, there's a million reasons why people don't bleed, right? So there's a million reasons as to like why a human is not menstruating, why, you know, why a woman, a human, is not menstruating, right? So we don't want to kind of say that that's the only way to be like, to be aware. And it's like, so I always recommend to anyone, because you will have your own body rhythms, like everyone, you will have your own flow.
I always
like,
say that right,
everyone does, right? But if you want to connect it with the like the kind of potency that we've been talking about in terms of the menstrual cycle, that is unfolding in the moon cycles, like every, like in every way. Like, so we get to recognize that in all of the moon phases. So like you so rightly pointed out, so we have that ovulation is the full moon. So what we may potentially feel at ovulation is potentially, you know, felt at full moon as well. So it's like understanding that each of those phases are playing out in real time. And if you are in menopause, like, you've bled, like, you've done the work. Like, you know, these bleeding years, for those who do bleed, those bleeding years are where you get given the medicine. Like, so with every cycle, we're learning something about ourselves, like, if you let it, so that when we move into menopause, like, you don't need to bleed anymore, because you've learned everything. And that's why so many women get frustrated, because they're like, why wasn't I told that? You know, when you first start to bleed, you're given your purpose. The bleeding years are almost when we learn, we live, we experience, and then we move into menopause. So we become this powerhouse. Like, we become this, we don't need to bleed anymore, because all of those phases are now within us. Like, all of that knowledge, that power is within us. And so we have that, but then there's the moon that's doing that like all the time. And that's what I love. I always say that the moon is like that kind of touch point, especially if we have irregular periods, or like you say, if we don't have periods at all, that moon is, she is the consistent inconsistency, right? Like, she's always doing what she does. Like, she's always doing what she does, which is ever changing, but there's this cyclic rhythmic nature to it, which is our cyclic rhythmic nature as humans. Except we've been unplugged, and that's not just women, that's all humans. Like, but we've all been unplugged so that we stay compliant, so that we're productive, so that we do what we're told. Whereas if we plug back into our cyclic rhythmic nature, we recognize that there is a season for everything, that there's a time, a place for rest, there's a time and place for production, there's doing and for being in action, and then there's a time and place for chilling out. There's a time and place for rage. We recognize all of that, but that's how we get into the situation that the world is currently in. Because people don't recognize that there's, because we've been pushing so hard. Now look what's happening.
So hard. But I think that's the thing, like what you were saying with like following the phases of the moon. Like if you don't bleed, or if you don't bleed regularly, or if you're on the pill, something that when I noticed that my cycles, I think the longest was about 45 days.
Right.
So they were really erratic, and so I started using the moon phase in the sense of, okay, after the full moon, rest. And like make space for my period. And like for those 2 weeks, been like early nights, really slowing down, and that really helped to regulate. But I've been using my app, and I'm kind of on this little mission. I got a weird, I call it a weird diagnosis, because I got tested for PCOS and scans, and I've got polycystic ovaries, but I haven't got the high testosterone, haven't got a lot of the other things. So then she was like, we won't say you've got PCOS, but then she called me back, and then she was like, actually, I was speaking to someone else, and we're going to just diagnose you as PCOS so that we've got you in the system for that. So I was like, okay, this is confusing. And then I got a call from the hospital to go into the gynae, and then they were like, why are you here? And I was like, I don't know. You invited me. Not invited me, but I got a letter, and they were like talking about it. And I was like, well, like explained about the diagnosis, and just said like, I'm open to having children. Like I don't know what's going on there, so maybe this is why I'm here. So I've had scans, tests, and everything like that. And I think that's the thing. When the doctor first said, oh, you've got PCOS, she's like, normally we put you on the pill, but for me, I think that just masks all of the symptoms. That when your body is, for me, my body was like, hello, like this is going on, like, and it had been going on for a long time. And then we went back, and then I've been diagnosed with, I don't say that out loud very often, but I think is it anovulatory, like anovulatory infertility.
Right.
So I've been on a mission, because the doctor was like, take these meds, and I never had a good experience with the pill. It made me very depressed. So that's why I've got I'm very wary of it, because in hindsight, like for me, all of those years where I had a lot of mental health things going on, it's like I wonder how much of the pill was a contributing factor for me at that time.
Absolutely.
But it's good. Well, it's good because I didn't get pregnant, but maybe I couldn't have got pregnant then anyway, because I didn't know what was going on. And then the doctor said to take this medication, and I'd like said, oh, are there any side effects? Because I'm very sensitive to these things. I don't want to get depressed. And he was like, no. But then the nurse pulled me aside after, and she said, do you want me to go through that with you again? I was like, yes. And she was like, there are side effects. You could go into hyperstimulation, like listed off all these things. So I was like, whoa, okay, I'm going to just try and do this naturally, cut down sugar, been exercising, doing all the things. I've just started seed cycling, and there are so many different ways that we can do it. It's a slow burn. I could take the medication, could start maybe popping out loads of eggs or whatever. But for me, I'm like, I'd rather that be a last resort. So maybe in a similar way for your hysterectomy, it's like, we'll try these other things.
Yeah, but that's what, and what you're doing is exactly what I did too, right? Like, so there was I walked out of that doctor's that day when he was like, oh, we'll whip it out, in the same way as your doctor. No side effects, fine. Yeah. Take the thing. This one's like, we'll whip it out, fine. Yeah. And then walked out that day, and like, whether you're spiritual, whether you're whatever, women are like, we have what's the word? I don't want to say tendency. It's not a tendency, but like, we have a disposition to be sensitive to spirit, to life, to emotions, to everything, which is a superpower in and of itself, but obviously not celebrated, and obviously told that we're all very emotional, over emotional, and oversensitive. So we have that tendency anyway. So when I left that surgery, when I left that doctor's surgery, like, there was like a deep feeling in my womb that was like, I can't do that. Like, that can't happen. And but there was a big, there was a part of me, that one that's like feels the pain, was like, God, this is annoying, this is really hard, I just want my life to get back to normal. That was like, yeah, do whatever you got to do. And so I totally get why people want to take the pill, like what you said, like why people might just take the medication like you were given, because do you know what, it's really hard to manage all of this, and it is a slow burn. Like there's no quick fix to women's health, because we're not broken. What it is like our period or any kind of disruption, or first our period is a messenger, right? So if we do take the pill, that does sometimes like you said, like it does sometimes mask any kind of symptoms that are crying out to be heard. And that's what my womb was doing. It was crying out to be heard, which is why I've been spending the last like 15, 16, 17 years like studying with like super practical people who talk about hormones and, like you say, seed cycling and medication, so that I've got that information right to the other end, where I'm like with like womb mamas in the middle of a jungle, like having a massage on the belly and knowing what's possible, right? Like, so we know like all of this is like, so there's possibilities of how we can manage it, like there is, but none of it is quick, because our body is trying to tell us something. And so what it's asking is that we listen. And like, we don't have time in that world out there. It's not made for us to listen. It don't want us to listen. So most of us think we're broken, and then we need fixing, and then we do whatever we need
it's like,
to
quick,
do.
get back in the game.
Exactly. I mean, actually, like that's the very opposite of what's being asked of us as humans, as specifically as those of us who bleed. It's like, that's like, let it be a messenger. Like I say, there shouldn't be pain. Like roughly it should be roughly the same amount of days each month, like, but whether that be 28 days is not necessarily the case. But like, knowing what is right and real for you gives you back your agency and power, so that, like you say, you can be in that doctor's surgery when they're saying like, you're like, wait a minute, is there any side effects to this? And they're like, no. And they're like, well, actually, like hypersensitivity, hyper this, hyper that, like you will be heightened in all of the ways, like, well, then that just makes us, then that will make you come across as mad, because it's going completely against your nature. And then take more medication to deal with that one. And so it goes. Whereas if we come into connectivity with the moon, with our menstrual cycle, like we can really then, like I say, start to take back some of what's ours, like reclaim, plug back in, really just recognize that there is a time for everything, and that any kind of pain that comes up is simply a messenger that wants to give us a message about, do you know what, that's not quite correct in your body, like you actually need some of this and some of this. And sometimes we might need guidance for that, absolutely, and that's why we have practitioners like me and you who are doing the work, so we understand these things. And we have people's experiences and stories of, well, I did this and I did that, and that's how women have always shared, is through these stories, is through like our experiences. So we've now been taught that like a doctor in a white coat knows best for us. And whilst I'm grateful that they do what they do, and if I broke my arm, I want them to fix it. I want them to like put a plaster on it, like, because that's a clever thing. Well, there's like loads of studies around that now. Don't want to go down that route, but ultimately that's like, that's what, you know, that's what's possible. But when it comes to anything that affects our emotions and how we show up in the world, like, you know, we've got agency over that. We've got our own mechanism, our own inner guidance system, whether we reuse this as our, you know, our heart, our womb, the moon, like all of this is accessible to us to know and trust. Like, like we know if something's up. Like, you don't need a doctor to tell you that. Like, you know now, like, okay.
And I think that's the thing.
I was about the seed cycling thing.
And I think that's the thing with a lot of people, like they know, that you hear so many times when they've gone to the doctor again and again, like there's something up, and they're like, come back in 6 months or 3 months, if that's still going on, then we'll look into it. And I think that's the thing, people also don't trust themselves and trust what's coming up, and they put it into the hands of like someone else. And sometimes you can strike it lucky and the doctor does know, and the you know, like, it's not all doctors are, you know, like,
no, absolutely not.
You know, we're not like, just in case people are like, what, like, we're not saying that at all. Like, they're qualified, they know their stuff, but there's also a lot that isn't researched and investigated, and that time given to it, when there is like, it might not be there might not be studies on it, but that doesn't mean that it isn't
it doesn't exist, and it isn't
or
it
isn't effective. Because I think after I'd got that diagnosis, I went into like a Facebook group that I was on and just said, like, is there anyone who has been able to heal their like PCOS and be able to ovulate naturally? And so many women were like, lots of different options, so many things. And I think that's the thing, it's like there are so many different options, not to just take the one that's in front of you. Feel into that, like, is your womb or is your heart being like, no? Is there something that's like, and not to override that and just to feel into that. And like, I think for women, like with fertility, I think especially, like I get a lot of some women when I do like tarot readings, and they're like talking about having children, and they feel like time is running out, and it's like, you've got so much time, like this, it's just don't. I think again, we're programmed in that way, aren't we, to think like we've not got enough time, we've got to fast track everything.
Like there's a time slot for this, or there's a time slot for that. Like if you are not, you know, there were women having babies at 60 and 70, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, without any kind of like medical interaction. You know, that's just the nature of what it is to be in touch with themselves. But you know, we've created, again, it's been, well, I'm not saying we have, like, it's been created for us to keep us compliant. Like, you do this here, you do this here, and then and that's it, you know. And that's why we have that first part of the cycle, which is like the maiden and the mother. It's when the woman is like her most necessary, needed, like she's got a job. Like the maiden is young and she's like joyful, and we like having youth everywhere, like as we see it all over the media, it's all youth, right? Then when you go into that mother phase, we've got this mother, like she's birthing, she's nesting, she's creating. Good. Like when we move into that wise and wild woman phase, that premenstrual phase, when we move into the crone, it's like, oh shit, that gets dangerous. And it's like, it's not dangerous. Like it's almost as if like we don't see them in the world. Like that's when women have like, they're having midlife crisis, or they're running away to Greece, or they're doing whatever, you know, whatever. I love
the toy boy.
Yeah, exactly. I can't help myself. I do love Shirley Valentine. But like it's all of those things come up because we don't acknowledge that part of our cycle. So that's why so many of us experience the pain and discomfort in the cyclical part of our in that part of our cycle. Sorry.
And would you say that's because they're not living in sync with it, so they're pushing too hard at certain points of their cycle, when ideally, I don't want to say should, ideally they would be taking it easier, but they push through that. So maybe they push through the tiredness or the fatigue, and then that can show up more when they're like in the pain.
Well, yeah, because like where in the world do they tell us like, oh, actually in your second part of the cycle your hormones are going to start to drop, which means your energy levels are going to start to drop, which means actually you're just not going to physically be able to do as much as you were doing in that first half of the cycle, which is the same in womanhood, right? Like if we're following the tracking of that as in womanhood as well, right?
Yeah.
So but like, so where are we told that? So we then think when we come into that second half of the cycle, when we come into premenstruation, that we've got to try and maintain the same energy as we did then. Well, we can't. Yet we have to be productive, to keep our jobs, or to be seen as like not lazy or indulgent, like, because you know, when I first started talking about this, so like the biggest thing that came up was what you've mentioned earlier, like is guilt, is shame for wanting to take time out or wanting to slow down, and self-indulgent, like almost narcissistic to care about yourself. Like what? like are you actually
who do you think you are?
Like, are you actually kidding me? Like if you are able to slow down and listen to your body in that second half of the cycle, and then as you come into your bleed and you bleed, then there will be, I mean, it's not as simple as this, but ultimately there will be less pain. And it also means that you'll be way more productive in the first half of the cycle too. So it's not as if like you know, all of a sudden like you're just like not doing as much. It's just like what you can do there, you just do less of here, and it all evens itself out. And it's the same with eating habits, it's the same with everything. If you recognize that, oh, actually, I'm really, my hunger, your hunger is bigger in premenstrual phase. So it's choosing what to eat is different. That's a whole different ballgame.
And that's another thing. There's like, that's the whole thing, like eating to your cycle to help nourish that. Like, that's just, I think, amazing. Like, oh yeah, eat all these different things.
But that's it. If we nourish, that's the self-care. Like, that's the, so that's not indulgent.
No.
That's like necessary.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what, that's part of why, well, there's many parts, but like why I really want to talk about the menstrual cycle in this way is because, like, if we can just take away some of the shame and some of the parts of, like, especially so that when women do come into that kind of part of their cycle, like as a woman, like when you do come into what I call like the wild wise woman phase, it's not so scary. That's our perimenopausal phase, and that's the part where, like, no one knows because it's not talked about, because we don't care about that woman in society. Like, we literally don't care about you there, because, like, you're no longer of service, which is absolutely bullshit. It's because when women are most powerful, and that's why, and then it's just explaining and sharing that, it's like, we don't want women to be powerful. We don't want those who bleed to be powerful.
Yeah.
When they come into that phase, when they come into that kind of wild and wise phase, and when they come into that crone phase, like, that was the woman that was most, that they were scared most of in the witch trials, right? Like, because she knew the most.
Yeah.
She's the one that would go to each and everyone and tell everyone what was going on, how, like, which has been turned into gossip, which actually, like, is a sacred act. And it's just like, and everything just taken, and it just recognizing all the places where all of our power has been taken, and the menstrual cycle really helps, like I say, on a very practical, but as woo-woo as you want to get level, right? It can, it can really work on, like, all the dimensions, really.
And that's, it just reminded me, I've wrote it down actually, because when I was listening to you on Shaman Direct's like podcast, you were talking about, like, women, like, back when women were being, like, burned, like, hunged and drowned for, like, just simply being women, like that, they were labeled as witches, but it wasn't, it's just women.
I know, right? And that's why I called, like, so, when I wrote a book called Witch, and, like, I think a lot of people thought it was a book about how to be a witch, but ultimately it's about, like, being
so much more than that.
Yeah, it's about being a powerful human, right? Like, it's about understanding all the ways in which women specifically, but, like, humans in general have been, but women specifically, have been totally judged, misplaced, misaligned, like, just like maligned, like, all of the ways, like, pushed underground, like, we haven't had a mama, like, we haven't had a great mama for 3,000, 4,000 plus years. She's like, we're bereft of that mama, and instead we get, like, patriarchy, we get, like, we get this big daddy energy, and it's like and so we do, right? Like, and it's like this very authoritative, very, like, very
it's like the emperor in the tarot,
exactly, right? And so we haven't got the empress, like, we haven't had her, and so we've got no place to look to until now. Like, we're really waking up to that, and thank goddess for that, right? Like, that we have got that capacity now to recognize that we need it all. So I'm not saying it goes straight back to a matrilineal, like, matriarchy. No,
it's the balance. It is like yin and yang, isn't it? It's the two coming together. Is
Absolutely.
powerful.
We need it all, but we don't need them. We don't need anything. We need the whole. Like, we need, and this is why so many of us feel broken all the time, because we're told we are. Because we're not whole, because, like, we're searching for something, we're looking for something, but actually everything's already within us. It's just like, we have to and like you were saying earlier, it's really hard to trust ourselves. Like, so we can say, like, the answers are within you, and, like, oh, if you just listen to your heart, it will tell you, or your gut feeling. We ignore the gut feeling. So, like you say, like, you can go to a doctor's and then they'll say something, you'll be like, I knew that. Like, we can know that, but because we've got no reference on how to trust our bodies, like, or how to trust ourselves, like, the idea of trusting ourselves can be really scary to start with, which is why I think, like, the tracking is, like, key. Like, so even if it's with the moon, if it's with your menstrual cycle, it's really starting to get to know yourself, not through a self-help book, not through someone telling you, like, this is a 5-point plan. This is a do this, not because of that, like, but because you are starting to get to know who you are and your patterns, your tendencies, your hotspots, like, your rage points, like the bits where you're like, oh, I'm a bad one today, you know, and really owning it, like taking responsibility for it, because that's the deal. We don't do, you know, like taking some
that's the key though, like you said, it's owning it. And being
you can let go, so you can let go of the shame then. So you're going to say that
and just being kind and compassionate to yourself, like owning it. It's like, you know, this is how I am today, but channeled in the right, in a way where I'm owning it. It's gonna come through so differently.
And then we let go of all that blame and shame that's been given to us. Like we've been programmed with it, like we've literally been,
it goes so far back,
fed it, well, exactly, and our parents before them, so it's in our bones, you know, it's literally in our blood, like we are carrying. And so many of us who have wombs are really carrying a lot of stuff in that space. So it's no wonder, like, because of past lives, past lineage, past everything, we're carrying it in our wounds. And so therefore no wonder so many of us are experiencing like pain and discomfort, you know?
And also, I'm just, as you're saying, I'm just like, how dismissed the sacredness of your womb to birth life, like it's just a portal,
right? Freaking magic. Like,
like even if you don't have children, like even if you're not giving birth, it's creation. So it's writing books, it's totally.
You know, I haven't got children, but I create, and I know that the potency of that space, and also know that, you know, from the women that I work with, from the humans that I work with, that, you know, the potency of what can be held there, you know. And I don't want to use the terms good and bad, but ultimately, like, we hold a lot, and so some of that isn't ours. So you know, your womb can hold an imprint of just if you've worn your jeans too tight, right? Like, let alone like letting somebody inside you who wasn't, you know, like, who you didn't want to be there, and down to all the millions of possibilities in between. Yet those imprints get held there. And it's so important that we recognize that, you know, especially if you bleed, that you do have the potential and the capacity to release some of that through the bleed. But there are like a million other ways, you know, to possibilities to do that too, you know, through breath, through massage, through all of it. There's a million ways.
And I think there was like a Vice video. It's a video on Vice, and I think they were talking about steaming. There were these women, I can't remember what country and like what culture they were from, but they were like, it's like, I can't remember, I don't know if I'm making it up, like demon spunk, but like,
I don't care if you're making it up.
I don't know if that's me retelling it, but like, basically they're making out you've got demon spunk in you and you've got to get it out.
I mean, whatever reasoning for that, like, we all need a steam to get rid of demon spunk, quite frankly. Like, get Gwyneth on that one now. So she'll have a potion and charge £80 for it.
Yeah, it'll probably be more than that.
You're so right.
£80 discount.
You're so right.
But yeah, it is like, I'm so excited about this conversation, because I know whenever I've shared anything about periods or a book that I'm reading, and I share, and people are like, oh my god, I didn't know that, like down to like your being on the pill changes who you're attracted to, and how I know like I'm saying, luckily I wasn't on the pill when I met my boyfriend. But that can happen, can't it? Because it shifts things. God. So then when people come off the pill and then they're trying for a baby, they're like, because I can't remember what, like, you'll know this, like, you'll be able to correct me, but when you're on the pill, what it puts you in this state, so you're not looking for a mate, you're looking for a different type of person. So it's back to like the ovulation thing where you're like, what? So the type of person that you're looking for is very different. So then
but you give off different like hormonal scent even when you take the pill, right? So but so I mean, and blessed in my job, like in my work, that I meet women and they're like, so I married him and now I'm like, I came off the pill I'm off the pill now like 3 months. That is not the dude I want to spend my life with. I'm like, okay, but like it's real, you know, real deal, because it's a chemically induced cyclic, you know, it's synthetic hormones going on in your body, and like I say, it's got a lot of good things. I'm not
Yeah.
again, I don't want to get caught up in the good and bad of things, but
No.
it's helpful to some
Yeah.
people, but ultimately it's also given to a lot of people as a cure-all, like as a fix it, as a quick fix to kind of just get people like past even the contraceptive element of it, right? So just again, it's what I said earlier, like no good or bad, right? But know what's going in your body. Just that's all. Like just make, so if you have the knowledge about what it is, like, okay, I'm just going to do a little bit of research. I'm going to ask some people, like you say, ask a few people around, and then you can make informed decisions. You're like, well, actually, that's the only way I'm going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. Like, it wouldn't be my choice for you, but you've got choice, you've got agency. This is the point. I mean, it's like one of the biggest points of my work is like, I don't want to ever take anything away from women and their experience, but I also want people to be living like their fullest, most like expansive possibilities, really. And if that's, like you say, if you're not feeling that, and then you're attracted to some person because you're medicated, and then you take, you know, you come off that medication, and then you're like, so what? Like, who is that? Like, who is that I'm living with now? Like,
it does make me think of like the guys that I went out with before when I was on the pill, and like how different. How I was like, oh, I've broken the spell, and it's like, oh, actually, I just wasn't on the pill at the time.
It's amazing though, and it's like, this is the stuff we're not told. And you know, it had great intentions. There was great intentions in the beginning, and like, I get it, but when we know better, sometimes we can make different choices. That's all.
I think that's the thing, it's just asking questions, isn't it? Rather than just being like, okay, someone said this, even whoever's listening to this, like, our word isn't gospel. It's take bits and feel into how that is for you, and have your own experience.
But have your own experience. Like, that's the deal. It's like, please, like, let there be like lots of possibilities. Like you said earlier, there's so many ways in which we can like regulate our cycle. We can understand what's going on, and if there's pain, like we can, maybe there's a movement practice before we have to medicate it. Maybe there isn't. Maybe there is only medication in this case. Okay, brilliant. But I've looked into X, Y, and Z. Like, it's that is you in your power. That is you making decisions about your body and not leaving it up to someone else. That's self-responsibility. That's beautiful. Like, that's, you know, that's I feel like that's what we should all be. That's what we could all be,
in an ideal world.
Imagine.
It's probably very scary for some people.
No, I get it.
Which is why we're in the situation we're in, isn't it? Imagine if we were all trusting our intuition and listening to our own bodies, and what? and not trusting our government to be our daddy and to deliver like what we need. Like, please, daddy, please make it better. Like, daddy ain't making it better, people. Daddy's not making it better. I do not want Boris Johnson to be my daddy. It scares me that people think he might be. It does scare me. Yeah, it is scary. So a few questions that I ask people, like on the like the series, is like on your About Me page, on your website, you say astrology is also known as sky reading in your traveler tradition, which I love. But I ask everyone, like, what is your sun, moon, and rising sign?
So this is really interesting. I'm sure it's meant to be one of them quick fire.
No, I don't.
I never give it out. Like, I never give it out. Like, because
why?
I trust it. So like, because I feel like it's such important intel about me. Like, it's like somewhat. I love share that. It. Like, in case people are like, but then people can. I know, but honestly, that is also part of my traveler tradition. Is that I'm big on like the secrecy, and like, I think everyone's out to like get me. But no. But like, honestly, I think we should. I mean, I love that people share it, and I always ask for it. But when people ask me, I'm like,
no, I completely respect that. But do you, without giving anything away, do you relate to your moon sign? Like, how do you relate to your moon sign?
No, I can tell you my moon sign. I'll tell you my moon sign. No, I don't mind. I talk about it all the time in my Patreon, but I don't often give it out. No, it's Sagittarius. So my moon is in Sagittarius, which is which is that kind of always wanting liberation, always wanting the truth, always wanting to like make sure people have like what they should have. which is in this case like information and agency.
And with that, like with your moon sign, like how does that show through in the way that you, for like self-care and the way that you look after your body, like bringing it back to your menstrual cycle, like thinking of like what a Sagittarius, that freedom. So I guess maybe that for you, that is that freedom to just do what you want.
Well, I think my cycle gives me my freedom, honestly, like because the knowledge I have about myself, but also recognizing that everything has a time and place so that I don't feel rushed. I make decisions based on if I'm doing things like this, for instance, like I wouldn't do that in my premenstrual phase. Like I would have had to have said no. Crazy articulate here, to be honest, but ultimately when I come into my premenstrual phase, I'm definitely not there. So it's about so I feel like I do, and I think that it's my cyclic nature that gives me that freedom. And so actually recognizing that, of course I would have found myself in this workspace, like working this way, because I'm not very good at staying in systems. Like I'm not very good, but but it gives me focus. It gives me the place in which, that Sagittarius arrow, right? Like it gives me the kind of laser sharp focus that I wouldn't have if I was just constantly striving for something. Like I can set a goal, but actually with my cycle, like my cycle feeds my goals feed my cycle, and it becomes like a really beautiful dance. And I'm into dancing. Like dancing.
But I love that how even just how your cycle sets you free,
right? And that's I mean, even like tracking, people think that probably is quite structural, but tracking then gives me all of the information about who I am. And so I'm like, then
it's a container for flow, isn't it?
Absolutely, exactly, beautiful. It is that. It's a container for flow, and I'm just so grateful for it. And so like I say, it does give me that freedom. And then like even down to something that would be perceived as like, oh god, it's like a what I have to write in my journal, like we're doing a code red tracking journal that's going to come out later in the year, but because it's like, let's make it fun, like let's make it like, I like the apps, like some people will always choose an app over a journal. I totally get it. But then also I just like the act of journaling. Like I really love the act of discovery and exploration that can happen too. So there's place for all of it, but ultimately that is what I think you're right. I think a Sagittarius moon does give me that. I love that. I'm like, no, I'm not telling you. Oh, here you go. Here it is.
okay, because you just twisted my arm. No, you didn't tell me the other two. The moon sign is the one that I was really interested in, but I've been finding it interesting when I've been asking other people like what the patterns that are running through, just like, and I can't even thinking like quite a few of them are all earth moon signs,
right? So
I'm like, and I'm realizing that I'm that comes up to me a lot. Earth moon sign. I'm Aquarius moon.
Oh, nice. Oh, you are a rebel.
So that's me. But and it's also that like being able to detach, and I like freedom, but it's a different kind of like, for me that freedom is like distance.
I love that. Social distance forever. Thanks.
Like I love being around people, but also not like totally I need my space. Like I get if people were too clingy or on my case, it's just too much.
I know. I haven't got any Aquarius in my chart, but I feel like that quite often as well.
My boyfriend's an Aquarius, so that's why. Obviously,
really? You get it reflected back to you.
I was talking to her, I was like, it's so annoying, and then she's like, but aren't you an Aquarius moon? And I was like, she's like, so you're clearly projecting onto him.
Brilliant. Yep, that's exactly what I'm doing.
What else, coming back to Code Red, and you were saying about the journal, like what else can people expect with the new edition?
So it's not a ton different, I'll be honest. It's a reissue, but there's some pieces in there that I felt was really important to add, which was a every day. So if you are tracking, so in the back there's a day-to-day, like it's slightly tongue-in-cheek, so as if you were having your own horoscope, right, like for the day. So you start reading on day 1 when you start to bleed, and it will give you a little bit of information, like a teeny tiny so I call it cycle scopes, but it's a teeny tiny little bit of information about what's happening that day in your body, or what could potentially be happening that day in your body, so that you get like a little prompt to help you. So there's that, and there was, you know, what we'd spoken about earlier. This is a new part as well, which is, what does it mean to bleed in each phase of the moon? So we talk about like trying to sync our cycle with, like, so we want to bleed when the moon is like new, and we want to ovulate when the moon is full. Like, we don't have to, that's the deal, unless like you're trying for babies, or, you know, there's fertility stuff, there's like lots of ways around that. But ultimately, I don't want people finding out about the moon phases, then finding about their menstrual cycle and thinking they have to be in sync, like that they have to, or otherwise they're not doing it right. But like, whatever,
there's something wrong with them.
So yeah, exactly.
And
so I found from my own cycle, and then from working with lots and lots of other women throughout the years, like kind of what it's felt like for them to bleed in each phase. And so we've created our own little what it means to bleed in a waxing moon, what it means when you bleed in a, you know, in a waning moon, and like the places in between. So just so we can start to kind of make some more room for there to be like more capacity. And my deal is, I want to really go down the astrological route. So like, what it happens when you bleed when the moon is in Taurus, when the moon is in it.
That was one of my questions. I was like, I was like, why hasn't that come through? Because I remember seeing you post about it before, about like your period coming late but then coming on a full moon in like Scorpio.
It's been like joy to get in that. I know, and that's been like a couple, so I've been studying that for like the last 2 or 3 years, really in depth. I've been charting that for a long time, but really studying it now, and then asking like women to be involved with it as well, and asking like anybody that will like be willing to track to then tell me like, all right, what's your pattern? So for some people it might not be like that they bleed every 28 days, but they bleed on every Virgo moon. And then like, what is that telling them about their nature and what's being called of them in the world? Like, you know, what's that bleed saying about you? Which is like, you know, can you use it to, I don't know. Anyway, there's loads of stuff, but that's next project. That's not in this
amazing
one,
like I already like, even as I can hear, even though it just hasn't been published yet, people like being like, Amazon, where, click now, buy now.
I know.
Like,
I'm so,
what does that mean? I want to know it.
Most exciting. I mean, for me, it's like, it's really helped, because it's really taken away the stick. So I hope that understanding like bleeding with the different phases of the moon, like understanding that. So I've done it with the 4 phases in the book, but I'm looking to do the 8 phases, like to kind of break it down even more, so that we can really start to understand ourselves on a different level. Like, it's like I don't know, like a rhythmic intelligence, psychology, self-psychology situation, and then go into the astrology. But that's next. That's the next book. She says, like, I don't know.
And it's out. When is it out? Is yours out on the 18th?
So COVID's on the 18th, and when's yours?
20th.
20th
August.
It's magic. Go on.
Coming up so fast, but yeah. So, and like, where will people be able to get Code Red, the newest edition?
In all good bookstores, Amazon, I imagine. But honestly, that man's had so much of our money, so do try and get it from a other bookstore. I get it. No,
5. It's like they're a bookseller, but they give like a percentage to independent bookstores.
Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, they support indie like brands.
Oh, I love that. Well, it's going to be much easier to get hold of than maybe the first edition was, because I self-published the first one. So this is with the publisher. So now you will be able to get it from most places. But if you can,
it'll be in bookshops now.
I know, and it could just be like, but like seriously, wherever you like ask like little bookstores if you can to order it in, because that's always better to support them. And I mean, there'll be things, there'll be workshops, there'll be, I mean, if we're ever allowed out, or if we're ever allowed to do anything, there'll be workshops. But you know, if you're not zoomed out, there'll be some Zoom workshops as well to go with it.
Right. And then like, how can people find you, like, and to work with you? What are their options? Because I'm sure that they're listening being like, I want more Lisa Lister, how do I get more?
Oh, bless you. Yeah, no, so the website is thesassyshe.com, and I do one-to-ones, I do like long-term, short-term, depending. So it can be very specific about your menstrual health, and then it can go very much into how you can use that cyclic nature to support like a business, to support your creative process, to support being in relationship with others. And yeah, and we work on creating something that's specific to you based on your cycle, your cyclic nature, your intelligence, your rhythmic knowledge, right? So it's not, so there's no like packages, there's none of that. Like we do a session and then we feed into it together in terms of what you need. And yeah, and the same with courses and things, you know, they're sporadic, they're felt, because I trust my cyclic nature. So there's nothing like, here's a thing, but like, you know, just sign up to the newsletter.
And you got your Patreon as well, haven't you? I
do, yeah. It's called She Power Collective, and honestly, it's just a place where, like, I really wanted a place where I could be in between writing books. I wasn't going to write another book, so I wanted a place in between, create, like, where you get the messy bits, where you get like, I'm just having this thought, because there's so many times when you're writing a book and you'll know this, Tamara, right, where you're writing and you just want to share something, and you know it's of value, but you also know it's not for the book, right? So I wanted a space for that. But what it's become is something so much more beautiful. There's like, you know, we do rituals together. We are now doing the Venus vortex, which is following the Venus cycle, together. And then each Monday I'll pull a card from my oracle deck. I'm just creating a new oracle deck that's coming out in 2 weeks time.
Oh yeah, you've got your deck. You've got a few decks now, haven't you?
Yeah, there's 2 now. There's 2. That one's just coming. I mean, it's out, but it will be available full being very soon. And yeah, so I pull cards from the decks and do readings. But honestly, it's just much more, it's just beautiful to be in communication. And I'm on Instagram, but not often. I like it, I don't love it, but if you want to find me on Instagram, it's at Sassy Lisa Lister.
Amazing.
Thank you.
And then one more question.
Oh yeah, go on.
Because this is like something I've been asking people. Because this podcast is called Another Phase, the question is like, if you could go back to another phase in your life, when would it be? And like, this could be another phase where you just want to enjoy it and relish in that moment, or a phase, if you wanted a phase that you wanted to go back and tell yourself something, like with what you wish you knew now, like what you wish you knew now.
What I know now that I wish I knew then. Yeah, totally. Oh, I love that question. I think I'd probably just go back to my teenage self, like my teenage self who thought she was so awkward, that thought she didn't fit in, that thought she was so fat, that she was ugly, and just let her know that actually, and also just, like, she worried all the time. And I just think, like, when I look at pictures of her now, I'm just like, it's so mad what we do to ourselves, isn't it? So I think I would just let her know that she's awesome, and like, to hopefully give her some of the power that I feel now as a woman in the world, some of the, and also just be able to kind of give her the heads up, so that I don't have to go through that. And I wouldn't want to not go through the gnarly phase.
I know what I mean. But if you could, while we're here,
I wouldn't want to go through that whole gnarly bit of like my womb feeling like it was falling out of my vagina. But I prefer not to do that on a regular basis. But then I would have still been, then, you know, if that didn't happen, I'd still been with the person I was with at that time, and that would have not been great, and I wouldn't have had the relationships. So I trust in all of that, but I would like to tell her. Maybe I'd just tell her about just know that there's a little bit of a cyclic nature to what you're doing. But then also, but now you've mentioned it, I'm also like, would I want to tell her that? Because I love discovering the ways that I've discovered life now. Like, it's just like, I love where I'm at right now. Except I'd like to be able to travel a little bit more. I'm not enjoying that right now. But but I would want to tell her that she's awesome. I think it's really important that she didn't hate on herself as much as she did. And that was a societal thing and not a personal thing.
Yeah,
that would have been cool.
I'm just feeling you like going back and just giving her the big, not even words. Like,
I don't think it would. I think you're right. Like just a big hug.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a big hug of love. Yeah, I agree. I don't think there needs to be, because I wouldn't want to change anything that happened after. Not really. I know there's a few people that you wouldn't kiss and sleep with. Of course. Let's be honest. But
that's part of it. But yeah, there is, like I said, like you're saying, I think, and so many people will relate to that, like how we are in our younger years and how much we are societally programmed at that stage to hate on ourselves. And just going back and just giving her the biggest hug, and that power transference going on that way.
That's beautiful. I might do that anyway.
I'm happening. Like literally, as you're saying it, I'm just like literally just like seeing the younger you in her bedroom, and you just coming in like behind her.
Oh, that's beautiful. I'm taking that tomorrow.
Yeah,
thank you. How about you? What phase would you go into?
It's changed. What phase do I go back to? I feel sometimes it changes. Thinking of like reflection, going back, if I was going to go back to a younger version of myself, I don't know. I don't think I would. As I'm trying to go back there, I'm like, now I kind of feel like that version of me kind of knew deep down there was something else going on. But for me, it's always going back. I was like, I want to go back to when I lived in Ibiza and I didn't have as many responsibilities. But also that time in my life was where it was a huge reclamation for me of like self-acceptance and feeling for the first time in my life. I think I was 25 then, that I felt that I fit in somewhere.
Nice. So
I think it's just, and I think that was such an eye-opening moment of like, okay, it's not me, it's the people around me that are like, I'm not fitting in with them because there's something wrong with me. I'm not fitting in with them because they're not my people.
Yeah, beautiful. Like, that's a beautiful knowledge, self-knowing. That's really beautiful.
But yeah, thanks for asking that back.
no, thanks for sharing. I think it's really important.
I've loved chatting to you.
always beautiful. Thank you so much for asking me. It's been a total pleasure.
Thank you so much. Okay. I keep that in. Like, I keep that in the video. People are like, what is she doing? Like,
code. It's how we
code. This is key for time out. But we're starting.